Good
And
afternoon or good morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Tanya Zucconi, and I am joined by Larry Trotter, who is hosting us today. And we are here for the third part of a three-part series where we talk through the Digital Medicine Society's AI Playbook. DiMe is the abbreviation for the Digital Medicine Society, so you'll hear us refer to it that way often throughout today's conversation. Before we dive in, I'll give Larry a chance to introduce himself, then I'll do a quick intro, and then we'll go through a few caveats and dive right into the playbook. Larry?
hey, everybody, thanks for joining. This is going to be, although it's the last part of the Dime series, it's still going to be fun. We're going to talk about the phase everybody really just jumps to is implementation. So, my name is Larry Trotter. I'm the founder of Inherent Security, and we specialize in HIPAA compliance for health tech companies. And again, thanks for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Larry. So, again, I'm Tanya, and I'm Larry's colleague, not only in this AI journey, but also at FastX Partners, where FastX Partners offers fractional C-suite leaders in the technology and operations and data population health spaces. We also offer technology and AI assessments, and we're happy to chat with anyone out there if you have those needs. So, as Larry mentioned, today's the third part of this series. We have gone through the first part, which is identifying what your AI problem is or what your problem that can be solved by AI is. And then the second part of the playbook dives deeper into whether or not you want to buy, build, or partner with someone to find the solution. And as in each of those two sections, the third section on implementation or deployment is broken down into several subcategories. And one of the best things about the DIME playbook is that under each subcategory are specific tools, techniques, prompts, and suggestions that you can use to actually do the work. So this is an actual playbook that will help you implement, in this case, your selected AI strategy. Just a caveat, neither Larry nor I have any investment with Dime. We are not employed by Dime. And the playbook, for anyone who is not familiar with it, was something that Dime created over the summer and put out earlier this fall. And it was a combination of the work of over 30 different partners from all across the industry that impacts AI. So happy to have folks go to the digitalmedicinesociety.org website and under resources, check that out. We'll also include a link to the playbook after today's session when we upload the session. But first, we are going to jump right in and spend about 25 minutes talking about implementation. So, Larry, if you'd like to share your screen and pull up the playbook, that would be fantastic. As Larry does that, I'm going to talk through. There are 4 subsections under the implementation area that we're going to cover today. And we're not going to mince words. Implementation, deployment, go live, launch, we might use those interchangeably. It is the last of the 3 phases that Dime introduced. Under implementation, the first subcategory that Dime talks about is planning. Then they talk about deployment. Then they talk about monitoring and scaling. And for those of us who've been around the block a couple of times, you'll recognize that those are 4 variations on plan, do, study, act, any type of actual implementation or go live or launch. So here you can see Larry identifying each of those 4. So why don't we dive right into the planning, which as someone who comes out of a project management background, I'll tell you is always one of the most important components because you can't manage it if you haven't planned it. And I will say that I actually think the planning elements of the planning subcomponent really overlap with some of the others. So on this right-hand side in the gray box, it's fantastic because they tell you during planning, here are the things you are actually going to do. And this is a pretty robust list because it includes identifying the team who's going to be doing the implementation, putting together your governance, defining metrics and measurement and success, and figuring out what will help you decide whether or not you're going to scale, which comes at the final step. So this is great. If you could scroll down a little bit further, Larry, on this, it'd be fantastic. And I'm going to just
Sure, and I
maximize.
just want to reiterate with folks, Ty, you and I had a little discussion about this, that
Mhm.
some of the things that you see here, or some of the tasks rather that you see here, are done in other phases. So there is a little bit of overlap. For instance, forming an AI task force, right? Something you should definitely do in the beginning. So it's reiterated in different sections of the playbook. So just keep that in mind.
That's a really good point, Larry. And I think it's important because one of the things that might happen is the task force that came together at the beginning, whether it was to help identify what the problem was and whether or not AI is the appropriate solution, may have different stakeholders. So it may grow at this point when you get to
Right.
implementation to include project folks, and you may not have included project folks to the same extent, whether you have a formal PMO or not. But here we go. Speaking of the task force, this is great. So there are RACIs, there are other versions of a RACI table. Basically, it's a responsibility table that identifies what is the work or the task to be done and then who should do it. And as in a RACI table, there are limits on the role. And in some cases, you should only have one person in that role or one title in that role. And this really helps when you go to finalize your communication plan. Critically important to know who's going to do what.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's pause right there on the governance, Larry. This is one of the most bandied about terms when it comes to AI, and it means lots of different things to many people, but everyone agrees that governance is critically important. So it goes beyond policies and procedures, but those are certainly an important part of it. I like that there are identified stakeholders here to help you get started, but again, as with the rest of the DiMe playbook, this is a guide. It is not something that you should absolutely implement as every letter is printed on the page, the proverbial page, because this is an online tool. But it should be a guide to help you get started, and you can, of course, amend it as is appropriate. Not all organizations have these exact titles. Some of them overlap within the same person, but it identifies areas that you need to have addressed as you move forward.
Right. And one thing I want to add here, Tanya, is this is not on Dime's website, but I've been recently reading IBM's 2025 Cost of
Mhm.
a Data Breach report, and 63% of organizations lacked AI governance policies. And even if they did have them in place, they didn't have a formal approval process, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to reiterate that because governance is very important, although it does mean many different things when adopting AI.
That's a good point, and that 63%, Larry, is a somewhat frightening, although perhaps not surprising number. And I'll say that whether you're thinking about the patient's safety or whether you're thinking about the privacy and compliance and security issues, whether you're thinking about the employees or the liability issues for the providers of the organizations involved, compliance is absolutely critical and it has to be obviously focused on as identified here. So I think with the time ahead of us, we have about 20 minutes left. I'd love to move on to the deployment section with one caveat, which is the last item that's in the planning section is developing a communication plan. And I'm going to propose that actually a communication plan is something that probably has been started earlier in the process. And at this point, it's being reviewed and revised. And that should be an ongoing process. So here is another one of Dime's lovely tools. Each of these blocks, these widgets, you just hover over them. I don't even think you have to click, do you, Larry? You just hover over them.
Yep.
Yep. And it'll tell you exactly what you need to do under that category, who to communicate with, when, how often, in what forum. And of course, that's something that will be revised throughout the process. But again, we've moved from planning to what they call actual deployment, which is when you're going to take the tool that you've decided upon and bring it out into the community. So as we move through deployment, this lovely gray box on the side, it tells you you're going to choose a rollout method. I would actually argue you've already done that before you get to this place as a part of planning, but you certainly have that already. You're going to be working with your tech team to finalize the integration. This is a really important space here, Larry, that you're focusing on when you're deciding if you're going to go with a phased rollout or a big bang, which is basically saying is your entire group, whether that's an enterprise or a group of practices or a single practice with multiple providers, a big bang is you roll out your new technique or technology to everyone at once, as opposed to phased is you start with a subset. So in a single clinic, it could be you start with a single provider, or in a multi clinic setting, it could be you start with one clinic on all of the providers, or it could be in a hospital or larger network setting that you start with one specialty and then you can scale that later. And we will get to that discussion of scaling at the end. The
Right.
advantages and risks are really outlined here. But Larry, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think every organization should absolutely, without a doubt, start with a phased rollout. No one should jump into a complete big bang. There's so many different things that can happen there, so many caveats. It can be very challenging to pinpoint mistakes when you roll out in that fashion. And for the IT people, I would like to say is in an ideal scenario, whatever you're testing in, usually your stage environment, it should mirror production. Now, with health systems, that can be very complex to have two exact environments like that. So it makes that makes it even more challenging to say, hey, okay, you know what, this worked out in staging, everything mirrors, production, and then pushing out to production, it really doesn't work like that in healthcare because there's just too many systems that have an exact mirror. So all that to say is go with the phase rollout. Just
I agree.
I don't even really the Big Bang, it shouldn't even be here. Go with the phase rollout.
You know, it's interesting, Larry, because surprisingly, some of the larger EHRs strongly advocate for Big Bang, partly
Mm,
because it just gets it all over with more quickly, even if there's a lot of detritus that has to be cleaned up. I will say that what I have seen work well, if you have the opportunity, is phased with the caveat that you don't choose the easiest, best, low hanging fruit alone. You
mhm.
balance it. So you may be going phased, but let's go with two providers or two clinics or two specialties so that you have one that you expect is going to go well, but you have one that might be more challenging that helps you learn a little. Because if you roll out to that low hanging fruit, as soon as you hit a challenge, it's really going to falter. And you don't want that to be when you go big bang or, the remainder of the team. So thinking strategically about who you include in that phased approach is really important.
And to be quite honest, you're like, more riskier than I am in this. When I when I was talking about phase, I'm thinking at the department level. Let's start with, let's say, one department first, and then let's move on to the next department of one health system before even trying to do this, in two separate clinics or whatever. But yeah, I mean, hey, you've had more experience in this, a little bit better than I am. I just know in IT how pushing a patch can throw everything off. We release patches in phased, approaches. So I just could imagine how with an AI rollout, what that could do, But yeah, still great feedback.
Good. I think it's really, really important. They do a fine job of identifying the advantages and risks of each. And then under each of these, if you could just click Larry on the plus and expand them, it just shows you for each of those bullets that were up in the gray at the top, what all the different components are, who needs to be involved, what the messaging is. And again, this goes back to your communication plan. That's going to be a living document, really lays out everything well and allows you to make progress in your journey around AI and healthcare, which I think is important. Okay, monitor. So here we are. We have deployed, we have implemented, we have launched, we have gone live with the technology. Now we have to keep an eye on it for what's working and for what's not working. And a part of the planning back in the first stage of this subsection was identifying how we are going to do this. So we're not figuring it out now at this point. Now we have dashboards built, we have metrics identified, we have data that are flowing in and that we are tracking so that we can learn from what works well and perhaps more importantly, learn from what doesn't work as planned, which doesn't mean it's not working well, it just means it's not working as planned. So, model performance, Larry, you might want to talk a little bit more about that. I know they go into great detail here in this section about the different types of models, about why you need to monitor it, not only going in, but also post implementation,
Before we
talking
get
about
to
the
that, Tanya,
clinical
really,
outcomes.
really quick, someone had a question.
Okay.
Amy Thorpe. Hey, Amy, thanks for joining. She says, are folks setting up AI governance separately from IT or data governance?
So that's a great question. I will give you my take, and Larry, I'd love to hear yours. And Amy, thank you for joining us and for the question. It depends, Amy. So I think that some organizations, what I have seen is that many organizations start with an AI governance that is separate and they move toward an integrated approach as they become more comfortable and appreciate what it looks like. I will also say that that tends to be more true of larger organizations and that smaller organizations typically can't afford to have two separate committees or councils because they're going to have the same overlapping people and be dealing with many of the same issues. So I think the consensus there in what I have seen is that as the audience becomes more comfortable with what AI is and what the questions are, they move toward it being an integrated component of their overall IT structure and strategy. Larry?
Yeah, yeah, and I think we're pretty much on the same page here, Tanya. I don't really like siloing AI out from everything else. It's a more advanced IT system, but it's still an IT system,
Hmm.
right? We still have our traditional servers, we still have IoT. Those are all IT systems, although some are more advanced than others. Really, you should have a governance committee in place already, right? But if you don't, you should have a general governance committee because you're still going to use your traditional servers. You're going to still purchase more. You're still going to move to the cloud. These are all still IT operations. AI just happens to be a piece within that puzzle. So instead of having two separate committees, I would suggest bringing more of the experts within those domains in the committee versus breaking it up into committees because you still need to go through change management. Still need to understand the performance of all the systems, regardless of whether it's AI or a traditional server as well. So the short answer is I think I agree with you, Tanya. There should be one committee that really manages every aspect or oversees every aspect when it comes to AI.
Yeah, Larry, I like the way you put that. And I think the point about including the right stakeholders is critical. So you may have to add someone with more of an ethics background than for some of the other traditional IT decisions you make. But you're right. AI is a tool or a technology to support what the organization is doing and help moving the mission forward. And so you're going to have many of the same people at the table. And as long as the right questions are asked, you can have the same group of people doing that work. And again, this is what we've seen play out over time. But that was a great question. Thank you for that one, Amy. Any other questions that we should tackle now, Larry? We can also wait another 10 minutes or so till we finish here. But
I'm trying to keep up with you and I'm trying to keep up with the questions, but it looks like she said yes, that makes sense. She said, thank you, Amy. And right now, that is the only question we had. So I
okay.
think we can.
Let's dive back into the study, the monitor section here. So again, this is the third of the four areas that DiMe has broken out under implementation. And the idea here is that you're monitoring the AI as a technology. You're monitoring the outcomes that it is going to help drive. You are monitoring the impact on the team, the workflows, right? Because a lot of what we want to do early on in driving AI implementation is actually reducing the administrative burden for clinicians and for the rest of the team. So, patient safety, financial accountability, regulatory compliance, scaling readiness, all of these have to be taken into account. And I think the scale readiness is one I want to talk a little bit more about. The next section is going to be on scaling. But
What?
before you get to scaling, and Larry, if you could click on that pro tip down there, I know you really like those within this tool. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Model drift and decay. So, for those who don't know, my non technical definition of model drift is when a model that has been designed with a particular outcome in mind or impact starts to move away from its reliability. That means that you really need to revisit the data that are going into that, right? Because you do all your training of a model with a certain set of data and you reach a point where you're happy with the outcomes, right? Or the direction that that model is pointing you and you implement it. But as you continue to input data into it, if it becomes less reliable, then you need to adjust the data input. And this is one of the challenges with taking a model that's been trained on data that may not be representative of your particular population. Larry, anything you want to say about model drift and decay?
Not necessarily model drift and decay. I think you covered it. I think they covered it as well. But this is one of the important aspects that's missing from the Dime playbook. Security needs to be here as well, right? We definitely want to monitor that. We want to see what types of threats are coming into our systems, who's attacking our systems, just like we would any other traditional IT system. And we want to have a clear overview of that. We want to baseline our system and make sure that AI system is staying within baseline. Is it still logging? Are the access controls where they need to be? Are there any user accounts there that shouldn't be there? Yada yada yada. Keep going down the line. Is it patched? We want to really pay attention to those when it comes to monitoring as well, because we all know one slip up when it comes to a security, they could, throw everything off, especially when you go to the implementation phase. And if you do roll out into the big bang, that's one of the caveats too. If you're rolling out using the big bang phase and you have a security flaw that's, been exploited, it can just wreak havoc across the entire ecosystem. So keep security in mind. That's one of the things I wanted to really point out that's missing here, but everybody should keep in mind.
And that's really important, Larry, because I think as AI is better refined, and we see it every single day, the models are smarter, the outputs are better, everything is more lifelike, more realistic, whatever the goal is. That also means that the threats are deeper and broader. And so it's something that as an end user, you have to pay attention to every time you receive a text or an email or a link, whether or not it's something you should really be clicking on, and whether or not it is truly something that is going to advance your daily activities and work. So
Right.
I think
Right.
the monitoring, it's not the sexiest component, but it is perhaps one of the more critical components. Nice distinctions between predictive and generative AI. And I think this is great because so many of us associate AI with generative AI because that really hit the scene in November of 2022. But many of us in healthcare and other fields have been using predictive AI for decades. So models that help identify patient cohorts, that help identify if patients are likely to present with a certain type of disease condition, those have been around for decades now. And this is really critically important to take this into account. But I'd love Larry to move to that last section. We can talk about scale and then we can wrap it up if we don't have other questions. DiMe has identified the fourth subcategory of implementation as scale. I actually like to back it up a little bit because it makes the presumption, which I think is very positive, that you are going to scale whatever you have implemented. And I think one of the items that comes under the monitoring section just before is that you're going to determine whether or not you're ready to scale. And there are a couple of different types of scale that DiMe discusses, whether you want to take the same tool and go more broadly across your enterprise or your entity. I think they describe that as expanding. Or if what you want to do is go deeper in your AI journey and you want to actually explore other AI tools, perhaps following the same approach, presumably a phased approach that you did with the first tool. But again, that assumes that you're going to scale. And one of the things that you have to do, and this should be happening naturally as you go through and you are reviewing your communication plan and deploying it, and as you're going through your metrics and monitoring, part of what you're monitoring are the key success metrics. You want to make sure that the AI you have deployed is actually helping you achieve the goals that it was intended to, not simply that you rolled out a tool. And in some cases, you may find that after a fair amount of resources that have been spent, that it really is not going to be the long term solution. And we hope that's not the case. But it's better to decide that before you scale than to roll out to an enterprise. Larry, do you want to talk a little bit about the scaling path that's presented here by DiMe?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with everything. Really, you just don't want to put a tool out there and kind of leave it at that. You want to track those KPIs, make sure it's actually meeting your goals before you actually scale. And I'll just keep honing in on this. When you scale, right, we want to make sure that the risk associated with scaling, are identified and considered as well. So we're not just deploying systems to one or two health centers, right? Security comes along with that, more systems. Also, not just security, the team that's building these systems as well. You have to consider expanding those resources and the resources it takes to actually manage it. So, the total cost of ownership of scaling, let's not forget about that.
That's right. It doesn't stop with the simple AI contract. You are absolutely right. And I think, Larry, that's why the planning is so important at the very beginning, because you are taking a forward look with that and you are making some estimates, and some of your data will be concrete, and you're putting together what your project plan will look like. And you're going to modify and adjust as you go along so that you can keep everyone informed.
And
But I think this
document
is, go ahead.
document
Yes.
everything that worked in your first iteration that you deployed. Make sure that it's all documented and not just the policies, the process behind it. Because what you want to do is take that, because it's standardized, and really, use the cutter solution to take that and deploy it within your next health system, clinic, or whatever it is. So you have this repeatable process. You already knows what worked. You already knows what process works, and you already understand the feedback loops to make it more seamless as possible when deploying into another entity.
I think what you pointed out there, Larry, that I like the most is that you could start with this DiMe Playbook as a healthcare entity, and you can tailor it to your own organization, and you can create your own playbook that is going to reflect your particular patient
Exactly.
population, your clinic culture, your geographic region, your resource constraints, all of those factors. And then you will have something that's repeatable. And as you said, keep your risk register, keep your decision log. All of that
Right.
is going to help you create more repeatable projects on a going forward basis. Because again, as you said, AI is another piece of technology. It has to follow standard implementation. A lot of this harkens back to good project management. Don't forget your project teams and all of this. And I think with that, we're at a good place to wrap unless we have more questions from the audience, Larry.
Let me take a look and see. Nope, looks like we're good to go.
Great. Well, then let's wish everyone happy holidays if they observe them and a good end to the year. Please reach out to Larry or I on LinkedIn. There will be a link to this recording available for those who weren't able to join us today. And thank you to those who were.
Yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for joining. And I'm sure we'll see you again in the near future with some other great AI topics. If you have any questions after watching this, please drop them in the comments or reach out to myself or Tanya. We'll be happy to answer those.
Sounds good. Larry, take care.
Take care.